Hi everyone, the partial prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, but then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. Okay, so this is my prophecy update September, October 2025, and I wrote, they are so missing it. Okay, so okay, so my last video I ended around 9/10, September 10th. And so we'll get caught up from there, the prophetic things that I see in the news. And so on September 10th was the Charlie Kirk shooting, and then on 9/11 was when they were really kind of conducting the manhunt for a shooter, and then they caught the shooter on 9/12. So I wrote 9/10, 9/12 with 9/11 in the middle, so I definitely think that was significant. Charlie Kirk is 11 letters, okay? 11 means judgment, okay? And so I actually think that, so Trump considered Charlie Kirk to be kind of like a son to him. And so I believe that the Charlie Kirk shooting was judgment on Trump for that, because Trump disrespected God's son, the nation of Israel, that God took away his son. Okay. And there's some verses that connect to that, but I didn't put that in here. But the other thing that's interesting about Charlie Kirk is his birthday is 10/14, which is the 8th day of Sukkot, and which is tomorrow. And I think that's a really significant date. And so I think he also might be a pointer to this prophetic date. Okay, so we'll see what happens. And then on September 17th, we saw Jimmy Kimmel was preempted, but then he returned on 9/23, which was Rosh Hashanah, which was very interesting. And so I put that in here as another example of the 666. Okay, so we have been seeing with Trump how he's getting rid of the people that don't agree with him. You know, some way, somehow, like exerting his influence to get rid of them. Okay, and Trump actually said that Jimmy Kimmel should just be canceled or something. But they did decide to bring him back. And so I believe that Trump is the beast from the earth, the 666 guy, okay? I believe he's one of the 3 antichrists that we've seen in these last days, because I think Obama was like the first, and then Biden, and then Trump. Well, I think it was Obama, Trump, then Biden. But really, ultimately, Trump is the ultimate antichrist, because he's running around talking about kind of being this peace guy, okay? So he's like stealing, so you talk about the thief in the night. So Trump's like stealing kind of the names for Jesus, okay? Remember how the names for Jesus are really important, okay? But let's read about the beast from the earth. It says, and he causes all, the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the freemen and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead, and that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. So unless you have Trump's name across your forehead, unless you're willing to kind of kowtow to him or bow to him, you won't be able to participate in the marketplace. You won't be able to participate in his economic marketplace. And so then I wrote in the other verses. I talked about this in my last video, but just how there's different marks that we see in the Bible. And so we don't need to be waiting and looking for a physical mark. I think it's a like supernatural thing. It's not a true mark. It's more kind of like like it's kind of more like God kind of marks you, and so that he knows who you're following. Okay. And so Trump, the beast from the earth, causes all to get a mark. And so that's either 666 or Trump's name. That would be Trump's peeps. Okay. In Revelation 9:4, we read about the men who get the seal of God on their foreheads. Okay. And they end up being protected from being killed because they do have the seal of God on their foreheads. Okay. So that would be Messiah's peeps. Okay. God's peeps. And in Revelation 17:5, we read about how the great harlot had on her forehead a name written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And so I propose that that would be Biden's peeps. Okay. Because I was thinking about this. It's like, well, not everybody's going to get 666 on their head. And, so I was thinking, like, for Biden's followers, they would maybe get like 777 because he was the seventh king. So that's what I propose about that. And then we had other examples of Trump trying to get rid of the people that don't agree with him, like James Comey and Letitia James. Oh, I spelled her name wrong. It's Letitia. So, and that happened at the end of September, and Letitia James was the end of or on 10/9. Okay, and then so we saw then on September 21st was the Charlie Kirk Memorial. And like, okay, so for me, I watched that memorial, and it was really the who's who of MAGA, is what I saw. Okay, they wanted to paint a picture that Charlie Kirk was like a Christian martyr. I really think he was an undeclared Christian nationalist. I mean, by saying undeclared, it's like he didn't even recognize that he was a Christian nationalist. And so those would be the people that have the Seven Mountain Mandate. Lance Wallnau is definitely a key guy in that group, and he and Charlie Kirk were really close friends. Okay, and Lance Wallnau actually spoke at the Charlie Kirk Memorial. Okay, so that's my thoughts on it. And so I took one quote from the memorial. White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller delivered this ominous message. The light will defeat the dark. We will prevail over the forces of wickedness and evil. They cannot imagine what they have awakened. They cannot conceive of the army that they have arisen in all of us, because we stand for what is good, what is virtuous, what is noble. Okay, so they have a little bit of a militant spirit. Okay. And just because they say they stand for what is good and what is virtuous doesn't make it true. Okay. Anyways, and so then on this same day, 9/21, Hurricane Gabriel became a hurricane. Okay. And the reason why I thought that was significant was is that Gabriel, the angel, the male angel in the Bible, he was the one who came and told Mary that she was going to have a son. Okay, so I think that's the significance of this hurricane. So there might be more. I don't know if it's judgment for something that Trump did. I'll have to look into that sometime, maybe. And then we saw the 80th UN General Assembly. Okay. One of the things that I didn't put on the slides is we saw a bunch of the nations coming forward at this 80th UN General Assembly, wanting to recognize wanting to recognize a Palestinian state. Okay, so definitely very significant, because I think especially at this time of year, I think God is really judging who is who belongs to him and who doesn't belong to him. So to have all these people, like a lot of nations, have really come forward and said they have acknowledged a Palestinian state. And so we're seeing a lot of the world turning against God and turning against Israel. And then, so Trump did a speech at the UN. Netanyahu did too. Trump's speech was on 9/23. What was significant about that is that was on Rosh Hashanah. So Rosh Hashanah is one of those weird holidays, Jewish holidays, and we read about it we read about it in the Torah. In Numbers 29, it says, "Now in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall also have a holy convocation. You shall do no laborious work. It will be to you a day for blowing trumpets." So it's kind of interesting. It's called a holy convocation, which would be like a gathering. And so we saw that on Rosh Hashanah, the nations gathering at the UN. Okay. And the blowing of trumpets, I think, is interesting because, Trump had the speech. So, and I think maybe in a way, I'm not really sure that, like, maybe Trump and Netanyahu did kind of deliver some rebukes to the nations at their speeches at the UN. So in some way, they might be like donkey types, being used by God to send a form of rebuke. So that's one thought I had about Trump's speech. What was interesting too was we saw the escalator gate happen. So Trump and Melania were trying to go up the escalator at the UN and it stopped. Okay. So to me, that is so significant. So Rosh Hashanah is the new year for the Jewish people. And so I'm wondering if this escalator problem is a foreshadow of this new year coming up. Okay. And so, how we saw that Trump, like he has this whole story about coming down the golden escalator when he decided he was going to run for president. And so I think, so when the escalator at the UN didn't work, Trump got all mad and they were going to investigate it and blah, blah, blah. And I kind of think that God put a stop to it because I think it's symbolic about how no longer will Trump be able to go up. Like it's interesting because it kind of connects to Jacob's ladder where you got the angels going up and down the ladder, going up to heaven and coming down. I mean, I think that's a picture of how in these last days we've had these American leaders that have, tried to like set themselves up as a Messiah type and gotten way too involved in the land of Israel. And we know that what goes up must come down. Okay. That God plans to bring down the mountains in the last days. Okay. And we see that with like, there's still just this constant, like airplane crashes. Like this past week, there was 2 helicopters that crashed in California. So God is definitely showing us that the people that are up are going to be coming down in this new year. Okay. On that same day, on 9/23, Trump also met with leaders of 8 Arab countries. Okay, to talk about this peace, quote unquote, peace plan that he has. Someone called it the deal of the millennium, the DOM, which would be a nice abbreviation instead of saying peace plan, which I always have to put quotes around, because it's not a true peace. Okay. So also on Rosh Hashanah, we also saw the return of Jimmy Kimmel, his show, which I thought was significant. And what was also interesting about Rosh Hashanah is that the false prophets were kind of exposed because there was a bunch of people that said the rapture was going to happen on 9/23 and it did not. Okay. So that was interesting. Okay. So then I was looking at this picture again. So this is the Back to the Future movie. Okay. And there's 9/11 hidden clues in that movie. Okay. And so we see Marty walking by the sign that says the Twin Pines Mall. And it's 1:16 a.m. But if you turn it around, it's 9/11. And so I thought, Okay, so looking at it now, I'm like, oh my gosh, that connects to the two trees, okay, the twin pine moss. Okay, so like the two witnesses, we read in the prophets how trees are a symbol of authority figures, okay? Um, and so what we saw was Trump and Netanyahu announced their, this quote unquote peace deal on 9/29. Okay, so look at that date, 9/29. It is a hidden 9/11. Okay, because 29 adds up to 11. 2 plus 9 equals 11. Okay, so I thought that was really interesting. Okay, 9/11 like shows up all over the place connected to Trump. So what we see in this movie too is the twin pine moss becomes the lone pine moss. Oh, I wish I put that slide in here. And so it'd be like the two witnesses go away and then the Messiah comes. And then the whole so I talked about this in an earlier video that it was talking about like TikTok was gonna go away, the app TikTok. And so I said that was kind of a sign of like TikTok, you're about to run out of time. And and there's actually this book called TikTok, and the main character is Michael Bennett. And it says time has almost run out for Detective Michael Bennett. Okay, and then one of the co-authors is Michael Ledwidge. So it's interesting that we got the name Michael there twice. Michael Bennett is like 7 letters plus 7 letters, which adds up to 14. And then Michael Ledwidge is 7 letters plus 8 letters, which adds up to 15. So that's interesting to me, the dates of the 14th and the 15th. Because maybe that connects to October 14th and 15th. Okay. And then it was interesting that this book was first published on Christmas in 2010. So maybe there's a connection with the 10. Okay. Like October 14th and October 15th. And then what we saw on September 30th is that it was actually TikTok night on Dancing with the Stars. Okay. And then we also saw on 9/25, Trump signed an executive order about TikTok, and the plan was that it would be sold to Oracle. And I guess that's happened. I was trying to look up the data and couldn't really find it. So we see TikTok back in the news. Okay, so I definitely think maybe God's way of saying, TikTok, you're about to run out of time. And then on October 1st, we saw the shutdown in America. Okay. And so I believe the shutdown in America, the prophetic shadow in the Bible about the shutdown connects to the death of Rachel. Okay. So in Genesis 35, it says, then they journeyed from Bethel. That would be Jacob and Rachel. And when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth, and she suffered severe labor. When she was in severe labor, the midwife said to her, do not fear, for now you have another son. It came about as her soul was departing, for she died, that she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Okay, remember Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Jacob set up a pillar over her grave, that is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. Then Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Eder. Okay. So I thought it was interesting, like these two names could be a picture of how there's kind of two people in this day and age where, okay, like, so let's say these are names for Trump, that he's either the son of my sorrow, and so these would be people that are not as big fans. Okay. And and it would be like America saying this, that Trump is causing our sorrow, or caused Rachel to die or America to die. Okay. And and it also would be like the same thing as like Esther saying, we have been sold. Okay, but then we have Jacob calling him Benjamin. the son of my right hand. And so that would be a picture of like Trump's peeps, or like even like Netanyahu, calling Trump the son of my right hand, like being all positive about Trump. Okay. And then it was interesting in the story that, so Rachel dies, gets buried. Okay. And, but Israel, which is, it's funny that it's the other name for Jacob, journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond the tower. Okay. So I always think the tower in the Bible connects to Trump. Okay. So it's this picture of, so I think it's this shadow of America's going to die. But then God's people are going to journey on and move past Trump. Okay. Um, and, um, and so, my sister who works for the government, she said like so many people don't know how Trump's just dismantling the government in America. Um, and we taught, and he's the eighth king, and the eighth king causes destruction. So he's definitely causing all this destruction in America. And so Trump wants to fire people. He wants to take advantage of this shutdown and fire people and then not pay others. Okay. And so that reminded me of Pharaoh with slaves. Okay. So Trump's acting like a Pharaoh having slaves. I mean, you have to pay people for their work, I mean, that's just not right. And so, so a lot of times Trump shows his true self by the things that he says. People just aren't paying attention. And so someone who wants to not pay people for their work, I mean, that's against the Bible, that's against Torah. So, and then Trump sent the National Guard to Chicago on 10/8, sent the National Guard to Memphis on 10/10, and then on 10/9 they announced that they were going to send troops to Israel to kind of help in Gaza with this, like policing the peace, quote unquote, peace deal. And so in Luke 21, we see, so Jesus said, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. And, so I think that's the last days. I mean, it is the last, Jesus is telling us what it's going to look like in the last days. And so what we're seeing is, I mean, we don't usually see armies in America, but now we're seeing the National Guard in Chicago and Memphis, and definitely seeing how that's provoking this civil war, this division in this country. And then it's interesting too that America's sending troops to Israel, because we haven't seen that happen either. So it's actually kind of bizarre to me that like the whole 2 years with Israel being at war with their enemies, America hasn't wanted to help, but now we're going to send troops when it's about promoting this peace deal for Trump. So definitely really kind of bizarre. And then, so talking about the Civil War. So it's interesting because, Trump had this Chipocalypse Now post in 9/6. And so it's interesting that because he threatened that he was going to send the troops or the National Guard to Chicago, and now he finally has. And so when he was talking about it, he put up this post, okay? And I kind of thought it was prophetic shadow of what's coming. And I talked about this in my last video. And so I put in some of the verses in the Bible that I thought talked about how we could see that a civil war is coming. Because it says, when they blew 300 trumpets, the Lord set the sword of one against another. And then it says, and the horses and their riders will go down, everyone by the sword of another. And then authority was given over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence and by the wild beasts of the earth. So definitely, I think it's prophesied in the Bible in the last days there's going to be civil war. And it's interesting because we see in America, I mean, in Israel, to this division, um, that there's a lot of people that don't like Netanyahu. And um, so it's possible we could see a civil war in Israel, but I also wonder if Hamas or Iran are going to attack Israel. Um, like Hamas would be for the second time. So that's what I'm wondering. So they, it might save them from having a civil war, but they're going to be destroyed. So then I made a list of things that I thought were setting up the civil war. The Bible says a house divided against itself will not stand. So Trump putting National Guard in Los Angeles, then DC, now wants to put him in Chicago and in Memphis. Along with his immigration policies, they're not really popular. Cutting the vaccines. The Trump CDC were cutting the vaccines. They were redistricting in Texas to favor Republicans. They had the Jeffrey Epstein debacle. In the trans people are taking up arms because they don't like Trump's anti trans stance. And so I don't know too how much, like, the Charlie Kirk, also the whole Charlie Kirk thing was definitely a dividing thing. Because, like, some of the things that Trump said was really anti-left connected to that. And then this whole peace deal too, I don't know how much that is, like, causing a division in America too. Okay, so then now we're in the Feast of Sukkot, okay, and that is when the Jewish people set up booths, okay, for 7 days, okay, and it's supposed to be a really happy holiday. And so then, and so it's October 7th to the 13th. Today's the last day of the Feast of Booths in America. And, well, there's an 8th day, but it's a little different than the 7 days. And I think there's so many prophetic shadows in this holiday of Sukkot that we could just spend hours talking about them, talking, the connections. Okay. I mean, I kind of think the booths connect to just kind of like our temporary, like a shadow of our temporary life, living in this world before Messiah comes. And so it's for 7 days, which connects to the 7 kings, but then on the 8th day is like a solemn occasion, okay, which would connect to the 8th king. So anyways, what's interesting, okay, so this is where I really think the prophets on YouTube are missing it. So with this peace plan, quote unquote, they're like, a lot of the people on YouTube are saying, well, this is like, they're not saying this is the plan from the Antichrist that we've been waiting for. They're not saying that. And I'm like, it is. We're missing it if we're not saying that. But a lot of them are saying, like, well, this is kind of the foundation for the plan that the Antichrist is going to make. And part of the problem has to do with this Daniel 9:27 verse, because it says, and this is sometimes the problem with the word of God, is God uses, like, the word he, and you don't know who he's talking about. Okay. And I think it has to do with God kind of sometimes leaves prophecies open so that there's multiple fulfillments. Because I actually think covenants for 1 week, and in the middle of the week an end to sacrifice and grain offering has actually happened in other occasions. Okay, because, like, I think I found a connection to that with Biden. Okay. Like, I think it might have been the last 7 weeks of Biden as president. Okay. So a lot of the prophets on YouTube are looking for an Antichrist figure to make a strong covenant for 1 week, and when they know they're not looking for 1 week, they're looking for 7 years. Okay. Um, but what I'm wondering, and I've been wondering about this for a while, is that the he who makes a strong covenant with the many is the he God. Okay. And so what's interesting is that what if you look at he shall make a strong covenant with the many for 1 week? What if that's the week of Sukkot? Okay. And they talk about how the covenant, it's like the strengthening of a covenant. Okay. And so what if we're seeing in these last days that God's strengthening his Sukkot covenant? Okay. And then it says, for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. So what if we switch to a different he here? And because what we've seen is that Trump on the fourth day of Sukkot was when this ceasefire started. Okay, October 10th. Okay. And so we saw Trump putting an end to sacrifice and grain offering. So an end to sacrifice and grain offering could be a picture of an end of the IDF soldiers being sacrificed in this war. Okay. And so because the fighting has definitely stopped. Okay. Um, and then the verse goes on to say, and on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. So it's like on the wing of this peace plan, we're gonna see someone come who makes desolate, and that could be Hamas or Iran attacking Israel, and or the people starting the civil war in America. And then it says, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator, until Iran and Hamas is finally put to the true end, not the fake end that Trump thinks he set up. But it also could be a shadow of the decreed end is poured out on the desolator, could connect to the eighth king who causes desolations. Okay. So we need to not come to the Bible with preconceived notions of what these prophecies are going to look like. Otherwise, we could be missing it. Okay. Another thought I had about God making a strong covenant with many for 1 week, because if you actually kind of take the whole, like the context, an earlier verse talks about, making a decree about Jerusalem. Let me see what it says. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, it talks about there being 7 weeks and 62 weeks and something being built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. And then after the 62 time frame, an anointed will be cut off, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And then it says its end with a flood, even to the end of reward, desolations are determined. So if you kind of take everything all together, I'm kind of wondering if the first issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem could be Trump's deal of the century. Because what's interesting about it is then it says he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. Is we saw exactly 7 weeks after the deal of the century was the COVID shutdown. Okay. But then I'm wondering if you could take this verse and say, but then for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. That instead of God waiting for 7 weeks to bring judgment on this second peace plan of Trump, that it's actually 3.5 weeks. Okay. Which would bring us to, so I have to find my calendar here. So this would be a second date that I'm looking at is, it's October 21st and 22nd are kind of the time frame, because, where did I write this down? October 22nd is would be 3 weeks and 3 days after, Trump's deal of the millennium. Because what's interesting is 10/21 is Netanyahu's 66th birthday. And we saw that date of 10/21, and it's the Back to the Future day. It's the day that Marty and Doc go into the future, okay, which is kind of interesting. So that's another possible fulfillment. So we just have to see how it plays out, okay. But it's interesting to me how no one's really willing to consider this peace plan of Trump to be a picture of the Antichrist, a picture of how he's the Antichrist, the anti-type of Jesus, okay. Where Trump says peace but causes destruction, but while Jesus is going to come and say peace and really have true peace, okay. And what's interesting too is that date, October 10th, that the ceasefire started, because we saw Nebuchadnezzar in the scripture. He actually sets up puts a siege. I forget how they worded in the scripture, against Jerusalem on the 10th month, the 10th day. Okay. Now that could connect to this one, the troops in Memphis on 10/10. Okay. But what's interesting is you could look at this, this, what Nebuchadnezzar sets up could actually be called a watchtower. Okay. And it would connect to like Jonah going east of the city to see what would happen to the city. Anyways, so I thought that was interesting because that would connect to like Trump being the tower in scripture. So that was an interesting thought that I had. Okay, and so what we saw is 7 plus 13 hostages returned October 13th, so 20 hostages. I thought it was interesting that it was 7, then plus 13, because then you actually, if you add the number 13, 1 plus 3, you get 4. So 7 plus 4 equals 11, so kind of a shadow of judgment coming. So it happened on October 13th today, which is the 7th day of Sukkot, which is also Tishri 21, which we find in Haggai 2:1. And that's where God says, okay, you guys that saw the temple in its previous glory, how do you see it now? So how does Trump's quote unquote temple, Trump likes to make it look like he's religious, how does what Trump is setting up, how does that compare to how you saw God's temple, God's church and synagogue before? So it doesn't connect. It's not the same thing. Okay. Because before in the church, we used to believe in good, that there was good and there was evil. Okay. Trump's all like, everybody's a good guy, except the people that are against him. He doesn't think they're good. But it's interesting that he's really got the people that are Israel's enemies all coming together in this quote unquote peace plan. Okay. They're actually at their heart, they're enemies against Israel. Okay. And God tells us not to make any deals with these people. Okay. Otherwise they're going to become thorns in our side. So October 13th was also when Trump was in Israel. Okay. And I thought it was interesting that that's the 7th day of Sukkot is also called Hoshana Rabbah, which is save us. Okay. And so I guess maybe it's the last day of God's judgment. So who are we calling out to save us? Are we calling out to Trump to save us, or are we calling out to God to save us? Okay. It's also Columbus Day today too, which I thought is interesting. So then I really think what was happening in Israel today, it connects to the golden calf. Okay. Because what we see with the golden calf in Exodus 32 is that the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, so they assembled about Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who will go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Okay. And so then they tear off their gold rings, like they stop listening. And the gold rings are made into a golden calf. Okay. So it's interesting that if you see Moses is like a picture of Jesus, so Jesus is delaying to come down from the mountain. So then the people assembled about Aaron, or the people nowadays were assembling around Trump saying, "Hey, can you get us a peace plan?" Okay. And so then what we're seeing, on October 13th is kind of these big celebrations about Trump, and like just like billboards and signs and various things. I guess they decorated the beach there, so when Trump flew in, he could see them thanking him. So anyways, so then what happens is, okay, so then they make it into a calf, and they built an altar. Okay, so then Aaron builds an altar before the calf, and he says, "Tomorrow shall be a feast of the Lord." So the next day they rose early and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. See that word, peace offerings? And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. So the people sitting down to eat and drink could be the people in the booths, okay? But the ones who rose up to play are these ones that were so they were all in the they were in they called it hostage plaza or something like that in Israel. So they were all gathered there. Okay, so then what happens in Exodus 32? God says to Moses, "Go down at once, for your people whom you brought up from the land of Egypt had corrupted themselves." So see God saying that to Jesus, "Go down at once, for your people who you brought up from the land of Egypt had corrupted themselves." And then God says to Moses, "I've seen this people, and behold, they are an obstinate people." Okay. And then the story 2 goes on and says, so Joshua, when he heard the people, he said, "There's a sound of war in the camp." And Moses says, "No, it's not the cry of triumph, nor the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing I hear." Okay. And what I think is interesting, it's like, we'd be better off if we were hearing the sound of war in Israel instead of this singing over Trump's peace deal, quote unquote peace deal. So October 14th, tomorrow, would be considered like the 8th day. It's a solemn day. God doesn't say a whole lot about it except it's a solemn day. And so tomorrow is actually the anniversary of the 2 full years of war. It's actually the anniversary of October 7th on the Hebrew calendar. So it's interesting that we read about 2 full years in the Bible because it's actually 25 months. Okay, there was a leap year between October 7th, 2023 and now. And so what we read in the Bible is after 2 full years, Joseph shows up to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. Okay, so definitely a picture of the Messiah, messianic shadow of Jesus showing up to interpret God's word. What's interesting about October 14th, it's 11 months, 9 days after November 6th, which is when they declared Trump the winner. It's Charlie Kirk's birthday, like I said. It's actually 9 months, 20 days from Christmas, which is a birthing cycle. Okay. So that's a high watch day for me. So I said that date, or like I said, the 21st or the 22nd become my next high watch dates. So we have to kind of see how things play out. Oh, my statue didn't show up. Okay. Oh, actually, this is supposed to be Trump with his hat. where his hat says, bummer that it didn't work, where his hat says, 45 to 47. Okay, because I think it's so interesting that he's walking around wearing this hat that says 9/11. Okay. And then it's interesting. So Trump is number 47, which adds up to 11. He's the eighth king. The eighth king does destruction. Okay, the first day of the RNC in 2024 was 11 months, 9 days on the Hebrew calendar. So a lot of 9/11 connected to Trump. And, so Trump was in the Middle East and Israel, so on May 13th and then on 10/13th, okay, that he was in Israel and then he's headed over to Egypt, okay. What's interesting is we read about, in Matthew 21, we read about Jesus entering the temple and driving out all those who were buying and selling in the temple and overturning the table of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. Okay, so peace plans by buyers and sellers. Okay, quote unquote. And Jesus said, "It is written, my house shall be called the house of prayer, but you are making it a robber's den." Okay, so Trump with this peace plan, he was hailing help from Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey. Okay, definitely robbers, enemies of Israel. Okay. We also saw that there's a plan to build a Qatar Air Force base in the United States. Okay, that was mentioned on 1010. So that's very interesting. Okay, what's interesting is before these verses, in Matthew 21, before Jesus enters the temple, we first read about the triumphal entry. And I kind of wonder if this triumphal entry is first a shadow of Trump being in Israel and how they're all like celebrating him and they're holding their lulavs. Because, okay, so the triumphal entry is so the Christians make it Palm Sunday, okay? But it actually could be a picture of Sukkot with people with their palms, okay? Waving their palms. So they were waving their palms at Jesus, okay, to celebrate him. Okay, so I think the first fulfillment is, people wave their palms at Trump, okay, but then we see when Jesus returns, they wave their palms, or the true Jesus followers wave their palms at Jesus, okay. And then what's interesting too is, okay, so Trump in the Middle East, 513 and 1013. So some of the judgment we're already seeing with Trump's quote unquote peace plan is this nor'easter in America is really making a mess of the East Coast. And so remember, the East connects to the right, okay? So that's interesting. There was also flooding in Colorado over the weekend, the Colorado mountains. And so I thought that was interesting. And then like mudslides too. So I don't have time really to study all the different weather events that are happening to see. I mean, because if we do, and it would be helpful, it would show us how God's not happy with this quote unquote peace deal. Okay. Anyways, so remember when they are saying peace and safety. Okay, so October 13th, so we saw, okay, so if you stayed up last night, you would have saw Trump spoke for 65 minutes, and then Netanyahu got up there, and everybody was all just talking about, how it's so great that we have peace in the Middle East, and how great Trump is. So God says in 1 Thessalonians 5, "For you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night." Like Trump stealing the name Prince of Peace. Okay, verse 3 says, "While they're saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape." So I highlighted they, and I got this picture of Trump and Netanyahu. Okay. And I don't know if you remember this, but this is such a repeat of October 7th because that's when Biden had his Saudi deal going on. Okay, they were going to do normalization with Saudi. So so Netanyahu, excuse me, Netanyahu was running around talking about how great this Saudi deal that Biden did is. And it's like he didn't learn because now he's running around talking about how great Trump's new deal is. And so what happened when Netanyahu was running around talking about how great Biden's Saudi deal was, then Israel got attacked on October 7th. Okay. So we saw the first fulfillment. Well, I don't know if it's the first one, but we definitely saw a huge fulfillment of these verses in First Thessalonians. Destruction will come upon them suddenly. Okay. Um, and and I believe we're going to see a second fulfillment. Okay. And then so the other thing that I put in here, um I just kind of threw this on the bottom of this slide on Genesis. In Genesis 11 we read about the Tower of Babel, and I've connected Genesis 11:5 to Biden's ceasefire. So Biden had a ceasefire in January. So if you listen to some of my old videos, you'll hear about that. And so I connected that to Genesis 11:5 because you see that date there, 1:15. And then now we have 11:9 connects to, like September 29th. This, so that connects to Genesis 11:9. So like two ceasefires, like, and very similar. They're both very wicked ceasefires. They're not good for Israel. To me, in this, 2 year war of Israel, whenever Israel was making progress, America, either Biden or Trump, was forcing Israel to, like, draw back, have a ceasefire. And it's like every time they tried to make gains, they were forced to draw, pull back. We also saw that with Iran. Like, Iran was on the edge of um, the leadership in Iran was like they were getting ready to run because Israel was bombing them. America had just bombed them. Like, they were just ready to run. Okay, so that would have been the end of the current administration in Iran. But what happened? Trump came and imposed this ceasefire on Israel and Iran. Okay, so whenever Israel is about to make some great gains, they get forced into a ceasefire, and Israel was making really good progress in Gaza, and they were about to, like, wrap it up, but now this ceasefire has been forced on them. Um, so this, I wrote about how the YouTube prophets are missing it, and so I talked about this in my last video, so I won't go over it now. And then I talked in my last video too about we can know the day and the hour, and because the reason why I left this slide in here is, so what does Jesus say? Be on the alert, okay? For you don't know the day or the hour, like, and it says keep on the alert, like, all over the place. God says keep on the alert in case Jesus will come suddenly and find you asleep. And let's see. Yeah, so this reason, be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not think he will. I don't know if it's this slide or somewhere else where, like, Jesus tells them to evaluate the current time frame. So maybe it's on this slide. Yeah. As Jesus said, you hypocrites, you know how to analyze the appearance of the earth and the sky, but why do you not analyze this present time? So why are people not analyzing this present time with Trump's peace, quote unquote, peace plan, and to see how it connects to the prophecies in the Bible? Why do they not think Trump is fulfilling the prophecies of the Antichrist? Um, so, anyway, so God said, be dressed in readiness, keep your lamps lit, which means, look into the Word of God to understand the day, okay? So that when Jesus returns from the wedding feast, they may immediately open the door to him when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those slaves whom the master will find on the alert when he comes, okay? So we can be on the alert, okay? And then, so why aren't people evaluating that Trump is opposing and exalting himself above every so-called God or object of worship so that he takes his seat in the temple of God in Gaza, in Israel, displaying himself as being God? Okay, so first we saw this on 2:4 with Trump's Gaza announcements, and that connects to 2 Thessalonians 2:4. Okay, but now we have Trump saying he's going to head the board of peace for Gaza. Okay, and he said that on 9/29, which is 9/11. Okay, so how come people are not seeing him doing that? Okay. So the Jewish people read Jeremiah 9:11 on Tisha B'Av, and it says, I will make Jerusalem a heap of ruins, a haunt of jackals, and I will make the cities of Judah a desolation without inhabitants. So when I read the scriptures, I definitely see like Jerusalem and Judah being kind of two separate things. And so I think Jerusalem connects to America and Judah connects to Israel. And so I think America is going to become a lion's den, the Civil War. And see, this is why I'm wondering if the cities of Judah, why, if Israel is going to be attacked by Iran, because I'm wondering if they're going to be the fiery furnace from Daniel. Okay. Like maybe Iran actually hid some of their nuclear, their enriched uranium, and maybe this whole time they've been working on, while everyone's kind of been sleeping and Trump's been saying, oh no, we got Iran taken care of. Maybe behind the scenes, Iran has been really working on nuclear weapons. Okay. Okay, so don't forget that false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. So even though it looks like Trump has done this great thing and now the hostages are home and it looks like he's making peace with the Middle East, don't forget that these, that even the false Christs and the false prophets are going to show great signs and wonder. Okay. So, because in Deuteronomy it says, if a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign comes true, but he's saying to you, let us go after other gods whom you have not known and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or the dreamer of dreams. For the Lord your God is testing you. This is the hour of testing to find out if you love the Lord your God with all your heart or with all your soul, or are you willing to, drop it all, drop Jesus to go follow Trump. Okay. And so remember this, the beast from the earth, he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform. So Trump is causing this great deception. Everyone thinks he's so great because of this peace plan and the hostages are home, but they're not seeing the whole picture of it. Okay. So those who mourn the destruction of Jerusalem will merit seeing it rebuilt with the coming of Mashiach. Okay, so if we see Israel blown up by Iran, don't worry, Jesus will rebuild it. We've already seen how Trump is causing destruction in America. Jesus is going to rebuild it. So remember, Rachel is weeping for her children because they are no more. Okay. But God says there is hope for your future and your children will return to their own territory. Now, I don't remember if I said this in here or I forgot to put a slide about it, but oh, well, I kind of made reference to how this current ceasefire is really as wicked as the ceasefire that was on January 15th, because um, we, so they're always letting all these Palestinian prisoners out of the jail in these ceasefires, okay? And so in this one, 1,700 prisoners were returned to Gaza. 300 of them were returned to the West Bank. Okay, um, so 2,000 of these Palestinian prisoners. Okay, so if they're in Israeli jails, it's because they committed crimes. Okay, and so now these people are all out to do the same criminal activity that they've done before, like terrorism and stabbings and whatnot. Um, and what we saw too. So remember, I said that Israel was making gains in Gaza. Well, so we saw on Friday, right when the ceasefire was, they said, the ceasefire happened on Friday. So right away, we just saw all the Palestinians just parading back into Gaza. Okay, and so definitely Hamas would be hidden among those people. Okay, so all this land that Israel just cleared to be free of terrorists are now being filled up again with terrorists. Okay, this is not a good peace deal. Okay. So, and Trump is not the best friend of Israel, like everyone wants to say. He has definitely thrown Israel under the bus so that he could get a Nobel Peace Prize. Okay. But see, that's what makes him the Antichrist. Okay. And then so God says, don't go either left or right. Okay. You shall not turn aside to the right or the left. Okay. And then we read in Luke 22 about how there arose also a dispute among them, the disciples, as to which one of them was regarded to be the greatest. Okay, so we definitely saw that with the Charlie Kirk thing, where, we had the right saying, well, we're the good guys, we're the Christians, we're the moral ones, and, so we've definitely been seeing this dispute between the left and the right in America. And it's probably happening in Israel too. So then October 15th is Simchat Torah, which I think is this great holiday that because they're dancing with the Torah, like, so it'd be a picture of like dancing with Jesus, the Word of God. So, and it could be the start of another Sukkot, okay, because we got that 15th date there, okay, or second week of Sukkot, okay. So stay in the dry land with Messiah. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord. Don't fall into the sea of Biden, Obama, Harris, or the sea of Trump, or the sea of Netanyahu. The great city was split into 3 parts. Okay, so there's so much I could be saying in these slides, but in order to get a video out, I have to keep it kind of short. So this is my update, September, October 2025. They are so missing it, okay? So consider the current day. Don't be missing it, okay? So thank you so much for listening and for tuning in. So hang in there. I think Jesus is right at the door. Like maybe this week, maybe next week. If not, I'll have to really think about when it could possibly be. I mean, I really hope it's not 7 weeks after, like with, the COVID shutdown after, September 29th, because that's a long time. I mean, God says he'll shorten the days, so I think it'll be a little faster. So, so I know, remember that God says weeping will last for the night, but joy comes in the morning. Okay. So hang in there, pray for God's grace. I pray for God's grace for you that you could hang in there until Jesus shows up. I know times are really hard right now. I mean, so we're seeing like over the weekend, there's like mass shootings like we're seeing multiple mass shootings around the country. Um, the weather's bad everywhere in various places. The airports are having problems. It's interesting too that it's a lot of the airports in the east that are having problems. So judgment for Trump. We're seeing helicopter crashes. We're definitely in the last days. Okay. Um, you know, I mean, I wish I could do some great slideshow to show you all the end time signs. But definitely consider the day that we're in. Okay, Jesus is waiting at the door. Okay, and don't be fooled by Trump. Okay, he is not the great Prince of Peace. Okay, wait for stand by and see the salvation of the Lord. Wait for God to bring salvation through Jesus. Okay, so thanks for listening. God bless. Take care.